Jon, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Great to be here, Jack. Thank you.
I want to start with just how much I appreciate you and writing this book. A lot of self-help books come from a place of success, which is great. Like you definitely want to learn from people from success. But as you said in this book, you sort of started writing it when, your mum got sick and you're almost questioning longevity and your humanity type thing. So it really comes through in the book. So it's really nice to get that perspective and self-help from somebody that's in that situation. So it really comes through. So again, I appreciate that. I really feel it when I'm reading it. So it's nice.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. It gives me goosebumps. I've had a lot of positive feedback from this book, and it's been a great journey. I wanted to write something about longevity and particularly the financial services industry. I'm a serial entrepreneur and been working in this space, but through my journey, as I write about the book, I came to appreciate so much more about biology, and I felt as though I had something to share about that. And it's been wonderful to get positive feedback, responses from folks who have read that book and said, wow, that really is it's a great read. Thanks for writing it. So yeah, I appreciate that.
And I hope this conversation inspires people to go out, grab it and have a read. So let's start with, why did you write the book? What inspired you to write it?
Yeah, well, originally what inspired me to write the book was sort of I'm again a serial entrepreneur, financial services, longevity, and I was really baffled by the financial services industry's kind of ignorance as to how their products and services are so tied to our longevity, how long we're on this planet, and the role of money and the different strategies and products that they sell and all these things. And I was just sort of, I really wanted to write something about that. But as you said, when I started writing and I was starting my next business, my mom got sick. And so it really caused me to rethink or reappraise how I even thought of longevity. And, I cared for mom for, 6 months, and, she had said, my life's been a dream. I don't want to do chemotherapy. I'm comfortable. And I was like, wow, it brought longevity home so personal to me. And longevity, it just is this invaluable asset that we all have, and like a lot of things that we take for granted. And so how to think about that, and how to, perhaps build a life better in a way so that when you're at end of life, you can look back and say, my life's been a dream. That's an admirable goal for all of us, no matter what journey you're on. If you can look back and say that, man, you're there. That's it.
Yeah. 100%. That gives me goosebumps. That's why I do this, just to help people live a long, healthy, happy life, so they can say that at the end. That's amazing. So can you remember like your perspective of longevity before you started writing this book, and what your perspective is now?
It's a funny question. Yeah, I can. Longevity for me, before writing the book, was it was several things, but it was probabilities, it was actuarial tables, it was math. It was also, again, through my career, it also became something about biology and this biological machine, as I describe it, this miraculous biological machine of who we are and what we're made from, and how DNA comes about, and how we have the power to influence our genetic expression. And just so that's sort of where I was at in terms of thinking about longevity, just in some ways very mathematical and computational, on the other side of it in awe and amazement from a scientific sort of miraculous biological machine, but not personal. I would say somewhat as an observer of it, not as an experiencer of it.
And in the book, I like how you go through like each what am I going for here? Like each term and explain it. So like you explain what longevity is to you, like what happiness, all that sort of stuff. So I like that because you in the book you even say you can go to 100 people and say what is happiness and get 100 different answers. So to explain it so you can actually understand it through the book is quite nice as well. Where was that something that you've like because I don't really experience that in many self-help books. It's just like here's happiness, here's how to improve it. So what was the idea of explaining each term before you started talking about them?
Um, I've been a student of self-help books for and self-help philosophy for decades now, and I rely on it. I credit it for a lot of what I've been able to manifest in my own life. I'm grateful for becoming aware of this area of philosophy or practice. And part of writing the book and in the back of my mind was I wanted to bring a modern interpretation, if you will, to some aspects of self-help or personal empowerment. And so maybe it was simply, I don't know that I had an intention so much of kind of defining each term, but I certainly wanted to lay things out so that people could know where I'm coming from, yet completely open-minded on what their own journey was. Because I know my journey isn't yours and it's not anyone else's. And so, and I don't like to, hide the football. I wanted to be very upfront and very practical. I didn't want people guessing. Life is so challenging and can be so difficult that I just wanted to build a very practical blueprint by which someone could learn and grow, expand their knowledge base, and hopefully they'll pick some things up in this book that can and will propel them in a better direction for their own life. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And then, like I said at the start, it definitely comes through. Like you can really feel it in your heart and in the mind. It's very nice. So in the book, you say because a life without money can be as difficult as life without good health. So can you talk about I guess, role of money in health?
Yeah, it's somewhat, I think I write about it. It's somewhat controversial to think about. First of all, it feels controversial to talk about money, talk
Exactly
about money
right.
in the context of health.
Yeah.
Um, but I became very frustrated again with some of the research I was doing, some of the books I would read about happiness and how to be healthy without addressing money. And because I do see a connection. I got upset when I would hear Oprah Winfrey talking about, some aspect of this happiness book, and I'm like, Oprah, you're a billionaire. I'm like, my gosh, no, come on. And so I did want to connect those things because I think that, how can you think about being healthy? How can you think about getting the good things in life when your rent's unpaid, your mortgage is overdue, your car's in the shop, you can't afford to get it out for repairs, you're just constantly stressed. So there's sort of that aspect of it, which is just a psychological aspect. I mean, that's a really difficult place to live. Um, at the same time, there's also this very troubling correlation that researchers found when they studied how long people actually live and correlated it to how much money they have. And it was very, very troubling that the highest income earners in the United States were outliving the lowest income earners by a decade or more of pure life.
Mm.
So so that is just absolutely troubling. And it's something kind of when it came out from the Brookings Institute, they just kind of wanted to bury it because it was just like, it's just so ugly. And then there's the physiological things that happen to your body when you're under stress because of money. You're firing on all these sort of negative um, uh, hormones and chemicals, just got a lot of negative reaction within your physical body that I think manifests itself in frankly poor health, which then leads to a reduction in your overall lifespan. So money plays an important, as we all know, and I'm speaking to the general us. I know there are people who can live in the woods on a can of beans, and I know there are people incredibly who have significant health challenges and yet are just so inspirational and happy and inspire us. But I'm just sort of the general us, the general me. And so that's kind of who I'm speaking to and where I see that connection.
Mm. As a PT here in Melbourne, I've worked with different demographics. So people with not much money, people with a lot of money, more than that, they need, and they don't have to worry about a thing. But it's like money isn't the thing that makes them healthy. It's those habits and all that sort of stuff. So whether you got $10 or $100 million, it's those habits. And it's just, I guess, that the more money you got can bring those healthier habits out further and improve your life. Would that be a way of looking at it?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who's generally speaking in PT, right? I just say, you have to have enough. So what's enough is for you to decide. You have to have your needs taken care of. So you have need, shelter and some basic, food. But after that, it's sort of like increments of betterment, so to speak. And I think after that, it's to your point, it's about wanting to be healthy or having a desire or an intention to be healthy. So I'm really kind of just and I'm also connecting money in terms of work. I'm an entrepreneur again, so it's as an entrepreneur and success in business, and how do you get what you want out of life, and oftentimes it takes money to get those things. So how do you do that? And so that's where I'm writing kind of more into that phase of it, if you will, in self-realization and getting everything you want out of life for as long as possible.
So you've been around a lot of people and done a lot of different things within life and business and all that sort of stuff. So where do you find people are going wrong with that connection between the money and longevity, health, and all that sort of stuff?
Well, I think it's certainly they're going wrong all over the place. It's I mean, there's just trade-offs, I mean, I've listened to, your podcast, and you do a great job and talking about, just for example, alcohol, or it's like people love to have drinks and drinks and drinks. It's like there's a trade-off there between, I'm not talking about money, but just that trade-off of good health. You want that good health particularly as you get older too, thinking about, so where I think most people are missing it, so to speak, is thinking about that lifespan and health span kind of tension, right? So lifespan's how long we're alive. Health span is how long we're alive living without chronic disease. And so where I think most people are getting it wrong is they're going to live, generally speaking, people are going to live a long time. And so those last 2 decades of your life can be extraordinary decades, provided what? You take care of yourself. You're not stressed for money. You've taken care of this body, this amazing body, because when you're in those latter years, you're not as robust in all ways as you used to be. So I think that's where people could do a better job is, I think I write about it as, what would your 90-year-old self tell you to do today so that they'd give you a big hug, like give you a big warm hug. Man, thanks for doing that when you were 40 or 50 or 60, because I'm over here at 90 and life's difficult, and it's got its own challenges, but man, I'm so glad you did that, because it's bringing a smile to my face. I have tranquility. I have peace of mind, because again, that's where you get to that place where your life's been a dream, because we all have recency bias, right? So it's those last years. And so how do we prepare for those latter years in a way when we're more vulnerable, we have less capacity to do the things we used to do, so that we're in the best position to get the most out of, a couple of decades of life.
Mm. So what do you think people should do to prepare for those later years?
Wow. Well, you know, uh, you know, I think take a minute, first of all, and think about your older self. You know that person better than you might expect. You know, you're sitting with them today. So take a minute and ask yourself that question. And recognize that this longevity, this time that we have is precious. And so then how should I could I take steps to do better? You know, I like to say you can and should be compounding in every aspect of your life. So just like we learn about compounding in your investing, you should be investing and compounding your investing. That's smart thing to do. But same in your health. You should be investing in that health and compounding that. You should be investing in your relationships and compounding them. So you should be investing all aspects in a way that is so you're growing and expanding into it.
Mm,
So that's a broad way, I think, of thinking about it. And then you can go into each piece of it, but broadly, right? It's movement and or the physicality of this body. It's what am I putting in my body? Am I eating wisely? Is it how much purpose do I have? You know, am I what am I doing and why am I getting up and each day? And then finally, who am I connecting with and staying connected with, right? So those are your 4 areas, and making sure you're taking a positive step in each one of those each and every day to the extent you can.
mm, mm. In the book, you talk about how podcasters always ask the question of what would you tell your younger self? And then you flip that around, like what would you ask your older self? And I think that, as a side note, that's perfect to wrap that up. And I think it's a good idea for everybody, like you just said, like what would your 90-year-old self, what would they want you to be doing now? And I think that's a great idea. I really like that, and I'm going to steal that for my own podcast, own episode.
Cool.
So yeah, it's good. You talk about leverage anchors in the book
Yeah.
at each chapter. Can you just explain those a little bit more?
Yeah. I coined a phrase called leverage anchors. And these are points, you know, we all know a concept of leverage, right? We've been on a teeter totter when we were a kid, and it's that teeter totter, it goes up and down. You put a little bit of weight and you get a big. So leverage is a key, you know, instrument, right? In putting a small amount of effort in getting a big result. And so what I tried to do was identify those, and I write a lot about this, which is how do you think small? How do you act small? You know, the saying, how do you swallow a whale one bite at a time? But really also, you know, where are those places where a small amount of energy or effort results in a larger or disproportionate gain? And so I summarize that as leverage anchors, as points where small inputs provide disproportionate or exponential points of gain. And so at the end of each chapter, I summarized each chapter and I kind of laid those out. And I describe those as guideposts. You know, if you think about if you've ever like hiked or explored and you're out in the or even just traveling, you know, if you have a guidepost that you know you're heading in the right direction, you don't have to worry about every single step. You know, if you can see something out in that distance which you know is in the right direction, you can keep going, and you can be confident that the result is not only you'll get there, but again, with these leverage anchors, you're going to compound this sort of side benefit that you'd like to expand along your journey, because you know there's life is a journey, there is no destination.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that. Again, really good, easy to understand in the book comes through. Um, there's so many different things I want to talk about with you.
It's
You
all
talk about
good.
you talk about failing in the book.
Mm.
In regards to, I talk about failing as well. Like if people aren't doing anything, then they're not failing. So I always say go and fail more, because I know that then they're going out, trying different things, trying to improve that. And you use a lot of different examples of entrepreneurs through time, how they've just gone out and it's only a failure if you think it's a failure. So is there any sort of, I guess, stories that you can share about your life that you've overcome? Like maybe it was a failure, but you know, again, you've moved on, you'd learnt from it and all that sort of stuff.
Oh, yes. I mean, I've had my share of failures for sure. And gosh, could I pull a specific example of failure? You know, I guess, you know, it's the phrase right from the Navy SEALs, right? Failure isn't failure until you accept it as such.
Mm.
And that's a very important thing to learn. And as I write about, as an entrepreneur, that's a very challenging, you know, concept, because we as entrepreneurs, we work and we work and we work. And sometimes I, you know, cite several examples where, you know, the business or the situation was at its darkest moment and you see no possible way for it to potentially succeed. And yet somehow, sometimes it does. And so where does that happen? And how do you recognize that is a very difficult challenge for a lot of folks. I guess for me, I think of, I can't, and I don't really want to speak to any one specific failure, only because I feel like I've learned from each and every failure, you know, and I think that's something that is the most important thing, that there is what's called a seed of equivalent benefit of every failure, which all that really means is that within the failure, within the challenge, there is a seed, there is something to be gained. And the question is, can you get it? Can you find it? And how do you get it? And then that's a leverage point, right? Because within that failure, there is something to be gained. And what I also have learned is that the faster you start looking for the seed of equivalent benefit within a failure, the faster you find it and you put it to work. So I guess that would be my biggest kind of takeaway that I've learned about failure for me, which is if you experience failure, recognize it, but also look for the seed of equivalent benefit, because it does exist in each and every failure.
Yeah, and 100%, 100%. That's great. Um, how, but in those times, it's very hard to sort of, I guess, remove yourself from those failures. Like you
Yeah.
said, sometimes things are just dark, pressure's building. So is there a way that, I guess, just me asking you for advice,
Yeah.
is there a way in those moments that you can remove yourself and try and learn those, like what's failing? How do I learn from those situations?
That is a really difficult thing to do. You know, my son, he's a painter. And he said to me when, you know, we were talking about this topic, and he said, you know, some of the greatest masters, painters, artists that we look at today died as complete abject failures.
Mm.
Now, that to me is so stunning and so like, I don't even know what to say. You know, should Van Gogh at the time when he passed have stopped painting because he wasn't considered a success? And yet here we are, you know, decades, centuries later, and we look back and cite it as genius, as mastery. So I don't know. I mean, that's a really difficult question that is a very personal calculus.
Mm.
For me, I think you just have to weigh, what am I risking? Am I willing to risk the pain and suffering that this is putting me through? Because there's consequences, right? There's trade-offs for everything. So if your business is constantly challenged and failing, and you just don't know, but I don't know, you know,
Mm.
I just, everyone, that's a personal calculus, you know, and the points of light. Look, for me, what I would do is I'd just get outside. I'd start walking and I'd start moving. When the pressure's hard, when things don't feel like they're working out the way you want them to, you know, you need to recognize that the only thing you have control over is this. Okay. So get control over this. And for those listening, I'm pointing to my head. So you got to get control of that head, point it in the direction you want, and continue moving forward, and know that the next day is coming. The sun's going to rise again. And for me, what helped a lot was getting outside and moving, you know, putting some positive, what I call positive brain food, things that, you know, give me positive affirmations, put that in my headphones, put that on my, you know, listen to this podcast, and go walk, go bike. Just get that body to breathe oxygen, and recognize that I got to get control of this head, point my mind towards what I want, and continue taking the steps that I want to do, because this is what I believe in.
For me, whenever that situation comes up, I tend to go for a surf, because out in the waves, you realize that the waves don't care about your life. They're always going to be there. Next day, they're going to be there. They just keep rolling through day after day, wave after wave. And it just gives me that peace of mind that I need to remove myself and the world's going to keep going. Like, I think it's just like you said with the pain, is I think it might just be a perspective of how you're looking at your life, like
Yeah.
whether you're failing or not.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. It really, you aren't failing until you decide you want to move on. And it's not it's not necessarily failure. You know, I always say, I mean, you're in control, and you can learn from it, and you can benefit, and you're not done. The narrative isn't complete until it's all over. So you're always in control of this narrative. There's so many examples of people who have continued to rebuild and build their narrative in a way that it just seemed there was no way. I mean, Donald Trump, I mean, let's not get political, but I mean, like, this guy, how he built this narrative off of are you kidding me? So, I mean, it's an example of how people can, just under incredibly difficult odds and challenges, build self narratives.
And let's build on that. You talk about moving rocks in the book. Where's my notes on that? We all have rocks in our life. What are some of our what are some examples of rocks in regards to what you're writing in the book? So,
yeah, I write about moving big rocks as sort of developing new habits. I analogize, you know, to obtain a new habit, a positive habit, ideally, right? It's like moving a big heavy rock up a hill, and the more entrenched you are, the heavier the rock and the steeper the slope. So it takes a lot of effort, you know. So my point of that is to recognize any change you want to make in life requires energy. You know, it requires resilience and persistence to achieve sort of better states. And so I'm always trying to move those rocks around to those better states. I talk a lot about the blue zones. I like this notion of blue zones, and I like this concept of setting up my environment in a way that helps me to move the rocks, to reduce the steep of the slope, you know, to reduce the length at which I have to carry a rock to get this new, better habit in place. So if I'm focused on eating better, cleaning out my pantry of the salty, sugary foods that I can't help myself consuming when the sun goes down and the TV comes on, the screen comes on, getting those out of my pantry is a way of reducing the slope and shortening the length at which I need to move my rock to get to a new place of healthier eating.
As I was reading that part in the book, like for me, again, as a personal trainer, it's hard for some people to identify their own rocks in their own life. So how have you identified those rocks and, like you said, reduce the slope?
Yeah. I'll go back to the blue zone stuff. I really like the construct that Dan Buettner and the blue zones put together for folks. And I walk through that in several examples. This idea of, again, movement and eating wisely, living with purpose, and connecting with others, and sort of looking through things in construct. I recognize that for example, socially, I mean, my work provides me a lot of my social interaction when the work goes away, and in particular as men age, that social circle constricts. It gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and we need to maintain that social circle. And I want to maintain my familiar relationships, so I need to work against those relationships. So that's a way for me to recognize these are rocks that I need to change my personal default behavior is to retreat, sit with my dogs, look at my phone, lift some weights, rinse it, drink some coffee, rinse and repeat. I recognize that I need to intentionally and take action to maintain my relationships with my friends, better my relationships with my kids, strengthen my relationship with my wife and my now father. Those are things that are that give life meaning. And so that's how I've gone through to recognize which rocks I need to move and stand to improve there.
Mm. So it's almost like learning about the things and then understanding that, oh, I need to improve those certain aspects of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So also building on top of that as well, like risk. Talk about a little bit about risk in the book. And again, in regards to money, life, all that sort of stuff. Like you spoke about how Elon Musk risked all his capital to invest in Tesla. Like he ended up sleeping on a couch just because he had no money left. So that's a big risk to take in a business. At what point should people be taking risks, I guess, with money to invest, grow, compound, all that sort of stuff, but maybe as well as money, but health and wellness as well?
Yeah. I mean, risk with, yeah, I engaged in lots of risky behavior. I mean, there's no question, right? I mean, extreme sports, I loved them, and adrenaline junkie for sure. I think the message is when it comes to finances and financial risk, when you're younger, you've got an opportunity there to be riskier. At the same time, as you grow older, you can, again, risk is all a personal calculus. We've know guys who do wingsuits and do all that business, and I'm like, whoa, okay. And there are other people who would just say, well, I don't want to go in that ocean. I don't even want to swim in the ocean because it could be a shark. It's like, whoa. So again, very much a personal calculus. But when it comes to money and being an entrepreneur and investing, what I would suggest is, yeah, when you're younger, there's opportunity to take more risk. But certainly as you reach different phases of your life, be cognizant of your tolerance for risk will and does change. So you don't want to be just sort of I'll call it just a knucklehead about it and just keep doing the same behavior you did when you were 20 years old to be 50. There's people who do it, they continue just to take risk with their health too, drinking and partying. And you're just like, whoa, 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 whoa. So I think just recognize your risk profile is changing throughout your life. You get to a place where others depend on you, where you depend on others, and you really just be eyes wide open and think of, I write a lot about, a probability analysis, think of the probabilities of the outcome you want with the behavior you're engaging in. I want a really successful business. So I want it as an entrepreneur, but I don't want to change my lifestyle. So you better, know how much money you can go at risk before you're going to start getting those trade-offs. And you can do that differently at 30 as 40 or 50. So I guess, yeah.
You've talked, excuse me, you've spoken about movement a lot. So growing up, was exercise a thing, like in the gym, outdoors? What were you doing as a kid, and how have you brought that into your life now?
Yeah, I think movement has always been something I just have naturally gravitated towards. I had the benefit of going out to college at the University of Colorado. We were in the mountains all the time. I mean, the more I could be outside and moving, it seemed as though the happier I was. And so that positive feedback loop always kept me moving. When my wife and I had our first child, I started needing more focused movement. And I think that's something and by that, I mean, I started running, and I did my first marathon at that point. And then that moved me into triathlons, and I ended up doing Ironman stuff, and I went to ultra distance. Today, I'm moving into strength training. And so I'm changing my movements through different phases of my life for different reasons. I think the point of all of this is that whatever you're doing, you just have to keep this body moving. Your body is an energy system. You're taking in food as energy. It needs to dissipate the energy. The movement allows that energy to flow out naturally and allows for better health, a better health profile to exist. So I'm all about movement, whatever type of movement anyone really gravitates towards, to continue doing that so that you get this lifestyle of movement that leads to better health.
What was the Ironman like? Sorry, I just have to go back to that. Where did you do the Ironman?
Oh, I did the Ironman Madison, Wisconsin. So I've done 5 Ironmans. I grew up in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, Minneapolis. That Madison, Wisconsin was the closest Ironman event at the time. And yeah, Ironman was awesome. Like, I just loved Ironman. I'm someone who, I've never had a Strava. I've never had a power meter on my bike. I've never had I just love to move. And if I feel good, I run faster. And if I don't feel so great, I run slower, but I keep moving. What I learned from Ironman was that seemingly impossible challenges become possible. And that's and I think endurance or any athlete, I think athleticism, even if you're not an athlete, I didn't grow up, being a really super high performing athlete in school and high school and college, but I got into athleticism a little bit as a young adult. And what I learned from that is athleticism or competing in these types of events allows you to build this resilience muscle we talked about, where it feels like you want to fail. It feels like you want to quit. But if you just keep moving a little bit further, suddenly you feel better. You can keep pedaling, or you can start running again on the marathon. I mean, so like provides a controlled environment to develop this muscle, this memory muscle. And people would always say, well, what are you training for next year? For me, it was always about training for life. I needed to build this resiliency muscle for life, because life is challenging. I'm going to hit roadblocks. Things aren't going to go my way. Failure is going to happen. Threats are going to show themselves, and I have to somehow persevere through them. Ironman for me was a terrific playing board, so to speak, to develop that muscle. And not only that, to also develop this thing called the heart, both in terms of intention and the physicality that one needs over a lifetime. And you need a strong heart to keep the cardiovascular system moving. And so that's how I feel about Ironman.
Yeah, and 100%. Just that I don't think people realize the benefits, not just physical, but mental benefits of pushing yourself, exercising in that way.
5Ks, 10Ks. It doesn't need to be Ironman. For me, it was just sequentially. I didn't even know how to swim. The first triathlon I did was a half iron. I didn't even know how to swim. I did the side stroke for 1.2 miles. Okay. I did the side stroke. I was the second to the last guy out of the water. And the other guy behind me, right, they picked him up and put him in a wheelchair. So like that was my first experience with triathlon. And so from there, I just kept going, and I just, just learned that and I learned I could keep going. And so again, I would really encourage people, just a 5K or a 10K, just, and here's the other thing about Ironman, which we just love. You would say, oh, look at all these people. They're so fit. They're just so incredible. I'm telling you, some of the bodies that you see doing Ironman, you would just say, are you kidding me? It can be done.
Mm.
And I always, when I was doing them, I've stopped doing sort of the ultra stuff. People say, I could never do this. I could never. And I would look at them, and I know, because I've done them and I've seen all the bodies, doing it. I'm like, oh, but you can. And so
Mm.
it's just being able to open your mind to the possibilities of life.
100%. So if you were to get power over every human, you were elected president of the world, and you could get everybody to do one thing, a physical thing, what would you get everybody in the world to start doing?
Gardening.
Okay. Why?
Gardening. Well, gardening's a great physical exercise. I'm a gardener. I love to garden. But it also puts you in touch with nature, and you start observing your natural surroundings no matter where you are. In your own, you can have a garden no matter where you are. You start thinking about sunlight. You start thinking about rain. You start thinking about the weather. You start thinking about, you see trash in a garden, and you want to go pick it up. So I would love if everyone became a gardener. The world would be such a beautiful place, and I think people would be happier and healthier as a result.
Is that something you've always done?
Well, I used to mow the lawn. I think my first, and I always enjoyed outdoor work. I think it just goes to just being outside, but I think developing gardening, just as I had a young family, I'm around the house on Saturdays. And so I always wanted to be around the house with my young family. And so gardening was a way for me to, I'm a busybody too, so I can't sit still. So playing in the garden became just this natural way to busy myself. I'm also a creative. It was a way to be creative. You start to see color. You can play with what's growing and where. I'm not a very good gardener, so it's a lot of trial and error. You begin to appreciate the passage of time, right? The passage of seasons, the passages of years. And so I think it brings home this grounding experience. I work in financial services where it's just paper and money and just stuff, it just doesn't feel very real sometimes. So it grounds you to Mother Earth, Mother Nature, and it makes you very aware of your surroundings.
Is that something that your families continue doing, as in the kids are still gardening and that sort of stuff?
So far, my kids, they like to watch me garden. And I'm not growing right now. I'm more focused on plants and landscape and flowers. I haven't moved to sort of gardening for my tomatoes and my vegetable garden. So I'm mostly into flowers and landscape gardening. My son, again, the artist, is starting to pick this up. But yeah, I think as my kid, they're young and young adults, they're busy with their so many busy things. I'm hoping over time they certainly appreciate what I build. I love to get the reactions, but people go, "Oh my gosh, this garden is so beautiful." Sometimes they don't even know why it's beautiful. They think I've hired a gardener, and they don't even know I'm in there moving plants around and thinking about the composition of a garden. It's a very fun thing to do.
Yeah, for sure. And again, like we were talking about before, I've moved from the country to the city, and that's one of the things I miss, because I would grow all my own food. So again, that calling back to the country life by the ocean, it's a good life. One way I want to go with this podcast over the next, say, 12 months is learning about the blue zones, all that sort of stuff, purpose, connection, all like what makes a blue zone, but then trying to bring that into the modern world, because, we don't live, it's hard to replicate those zones, and it's hard to, well, I don't know if it's hard, but is it hard or is it a want? And that's what I'm trying to figure out. So how do we bring those blue zones into modern life? Is it a want? Is it hard to do? Like, what would you get people to start doing to live more like a blue zone, or where you think the research should go towards?
Yeah, great question. And I think, well deserved to point attention towards the science around the blue zones. I mean, and to your point, even the blue zones themselves are challenged to remain blue zones.
Mm,
Okinawa, Japan, for example, I mean, I think sadly today probably wouldn't qualify as a blue zone. They've been infiltrated with fast food and, all the modern conveniences, so to speak, that I think really take us away from having a blue zone life.
mm,
But to your point, and I think that's what I've tried to write in the book, which is we all, by thinking about these blue zone, if you will, tenants, so to speak, and being intentional about them, and pointing our lives a little bit more towards them, I think we can all blue zoneify, right, our life. We may all not be able to live in a blue, a traditionally kind of blue zone, but we can certainly blue zone our life. And I think that's really, it even goes back to gardening, which is being very cognizant of our environment and how we can change our environment. And that means, am I at a garden apartment on a north facing, or I'm on the third floor, south facing with a big picture window? It may be still a small apartment, but the difference between those two places is magic.
mm,
You may be on the end of a busy street with horns honking, or at a dead end, a cul-de-sac. So it doesn't mean you have to move to a blue zone. We can all blue zoneify our lives if we're thinking very intentionally about our environment. And what blue zones at the end of the day says, and again, I think Dan is really brilliant about this, is how do you shape that environment in a way that makes the healthier, better choice easier, the default choice? So we're not having to rely so much on this self-discipline and this intention mechanism that I think you and I, we know this from all the workout and the training that you've done in your career, which is like, that takes a lot of drive. So how can we make the rest of our life kind of work just by default a little bit better? And that's a great life hack that
mm.
I think all of us could use to, again, blue zoneify, if you will, our own lives.
Is there any, like you said, with your training and all that sort of stuff, you'll never want to wear watches and track everything. Like, neither am I. Like, I'm trying to track my HRV and improve my HRV through wearables and that sort of stuff. But even I find that a bit hard. But is there any technologies that you've used to improve like that blue zone vibe in your life?
Um,
And is it a thing?
yeah,
Like, do you think
yeah,
technology has its place within the future to improve your
I
life?
think, yeah, look, I mean, well, for sure, technology is improving all of our lives in so many ways. I mean, it's just like, it's so incredible to be alive today and be able to access any and all of this technology for all aspects of our life. I think when it comes to health and wellness, setting aside sort of the things that are coming in terms of precision medicine and better understanding this thing called the biological machine, when we think about interacting with technology for health and wellness, what I would say is whatever works for you. I mean, really, some of my friends are Strava driven. They just want to go out and ride because the Strava, and they're looking at their routes, and if someone bettered their time, they're on that bike the next thing. So from my perspective, again, it's sort of, I'm very open-minded on if there's a piece of technology that's making it more exciting or helping you go do the habits that lead to health and wellness, amazing. For me, I mean, it's as simple as, a FaceTime video where I can work out with my strength trainer no matter where I'm at in the world. I'm down in Baja, Mexico, but I'll FaceTime him and we'll put the phone up and we'll say, what are we doing today? I'm like, oh, I did chest yesterday. We're going to do back. Okay, let's go get to it. So for me, it's like that simple. Um, but that's just how I'm using the technology for me. And what I would say about all of what I'm writing about and doing is whatever works for you, that's the right technology.
Mm. And it comes through in the book. Like I said, we've spoken about purpose, rocks, risk, all that sort of stuff. And you do a really good job in the book by presenting it in a way that I can adopt in my life. So again, I appreciate that. Where can people find you and the book and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I'm online. I'm on all the social media platforms. So find me wherever you like to get your social media. My website, it's Jon, Jon Sabes, Sabes. I've got a website, jonsabes.com. The book's available on Amazon, Healthy, Wealthy, Longevity, The Good Things in Life for as Long as Possible. Interact with me on social media. Find me, talk to me. I've got these little journals that I've developed over the years, and those are available. I've found those to be a wonderful tool. So if I think prompt journaling is a technology, and for me, that's the technology for me that has led to the greatest gains. And I've developed it over many, many years and used it. And so I've been handing them out over the years, and people who have used them have loved these things. And so I'm going to send you some down to the land down under. So let me get some to you, Jack. And I'd love to be back on your podcast at some point in the future where you have used these and go like, okay, this thing, did or didn't work. I mean, it'd be a fun chat.
Yeah.
We talk more blue zones too.
Yep. Either coming for a surf over there, or I'll get you over here and we'll do a surf trip over here.
Done.
Again, Jon, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Been a pleasure, Jack. Thanks for having me.